Hello, you're very welcome to The Week in Politics, and what a week it has been. Fianna Fáil back in government and straight into a pretty public row about ministerial appointments. Disappointed dissenters too in Fine Gael and the Greens. But also the revelation that newly appointed Agriculture Minister Barry Cowen served a 3-month ban for drink driving in 2016. He's one of our guests this Sunday, along with Peter Burke, the new Minister of State for Housing and Local Government. Sinn Féin's new Jobs and Enterprise spokesperson Imelda Munster, the Social Democrats' Jennifer Whitmore, and Rise TD Paul Murphy. But Barry Cowen, let's start with you, and certainly a lot of questions to answer. So you were stopped at a Garda checkpoint on your way back from the All-Ireland in September 2016. What had happened that day?
Well, look, that day I was at the match. I had two drinks before the match. I had something to eat afterwards. And was on the way home when I was stopped and tested and subsequently retested at a Garda station. It was found to be over the limit. It was marginal, but doesn't take from the issue at all. There was an issue in relation to the licence, which has since been rectified to a full licence and so forth. But look, the fact of the matter is it was a terribly stupid mistake on my part. It's something that I'm very regretful for. It's This publicity associated with it now is part of the punishment, which is only right and proper. You know, I'm in public life. I have to accept responsibility for my actions. It was a serious lack of and lapse of judgment. I wasn't reared that way. I have a wife and family and young children, kids in their early 20s, some of them, and it's no example to them. And it's something I have to be truthfully honest about and say that I am humiliated by it, embarrassed by it, but have to accept the punishment that has been given, have to accept the ridicule that is there now, and have to, you know, if any good can come out of this, acknowledge the fact that if somebody is thinking of doing what I did, that they might think of me, they might think twice before doing it. You know, I could say I was fortunate in that there was nobody hurt, injured or maimed or killed, thankfully. But that's not to say that would be the case in any other instance of a similar nature.
Why were you driving on a provisional licence in 2016? You were, 49 years old?
Yeah, well, look, that's an issue which many others, you know, were involved or had persisted with, and I was one of those. I've since obviously regularised that.
You'd never had a full licence and lost it, just to be clear on that, did you?
No, it wasn't that at all. No, it was, I've regularised it and it's a full licence because I want to be compliant with the legislation that came in the meantime, which is only right and proper.
But you were also driving unaccompanied on a provisional licence, weren't you? At
that time, no, I wasn't.
Did you ever drive unaccompanied on a provisional licence?
I had indeed, yes, I had. Previous to that, of course, I had. And, you know, when the legislation was rectified in that area, I rectified the issue and regularised my own situation thereafter.
It's just, there were a lot of debates about drink driving in the last Dáil. Shane Ross brought forward a lot of legislation, a lot of very heated debates. Why didn't you tell the Dáil the truth then?
I voted and supported all that legislation and never deviated from what was presented to the Dáil at that time. Now, I will say, you know, people have said, should I have told the Taoiseach? Should I have told the leader of Fianna Fáil? Yes, naively in hindsight, maybe I should. You're quite right. Maybe I should have stood up in the Dáil and led from the front on this issue and acknowledge my terrible mistake.
Were you trying to keep it a secret?
I wasn't trying to keep it secret. I was trying to get on with my job. I acknowledged and appreciated the severity of what had happened. I in no way tried to, remove myself from the implications. And I took the medicine that was dished at the time. But that, you know, as I said to you, being in public life, you leave yourself open for this, and rightly so. And I accept and acknowledge the humiliation, the embarrassment that's associated with it. And as I said, I can only hope that I can get on with my job, but more to the point in relation to this specific issue, I can only hope that it can serve as a reminder to people to please don't do as I did on that occasion. Don't allow it to happen. Just a mouthful is too much.
But you broke the law. You didn't tell your leader. You didn't tell the Dáil. You've admitted yourself lapses in judgment as well as law breaking. Does that make you fit to be a minister?
I'd like to think so. As I said, the law and the legislation as it was had ramifications. I accepted those ramifications. I've sought to do my job capably and effectively on behalf of the constituents that give me the privilege to do so in the meantime. This is an issue that I have to bear full responsibility for. I acknowledge and appreciate the severity of it. I know the hurt and harm it is doing to people who have been affected by drunk drivers who have caused injury, maiming and the loss of life. And that's something I have to carry with me and use it to a positive effect if I can at all.
Because there may be people who've had to go to the funerals of loved ones who died as a result of drink driving, and they're looking at you, a minister, and saying, that's not leadership. I don't want that to lead me.
I know, and I accept the shame associated with that. And as I said, I have to learn from it. I have to show example and leadership from here on in, and I would hope and expect and appeal to people whom are thinking of taking a drink and driving to think again and think of me and think of the ramifications that I have rightly suffered, and maybe it might cause them not to take that risk.
Just before I go to the panel, is there anything else in terms of your history on the roads that needs to be put on the public record? Have you ever failed a breathalyser? Are there any other penalties that you faced?
No, I've had the same issues as many others in relation to speeding or parking, but nothing at all of this nature.
OK. Let's bring in the panel now. And Paul Murphy, let's go to you first of all. We've heard the Minister's apology. It's been accepted, it appears, by his coalition partners and by his party leaders, although they reject the behaviour. Is that the end of the matter?
It might be. It depends on if anything else was to come out, obviously, in the next number of weeks. I mean, I find it a bit bizarre. Obviously, I accept what the Minister is saying, but a bit bizarre that someone who was almost 50 and presumably drove most days of his life didn't have a full driving licence. And the thing that struck me in reading about this story and so on is the contrast, and it's a contrast that comes from the Guards, is the contrast with how Claire Daly was dealt with. Claire Daly is someone who was not over the drink driving limit. Her story didn't wait 4 years to come out, but it came out, I think, that night that she was arrested. And the only conclusion is that it was leaked at the time by the Guards because she was exposing, or by some Guards, because she was exposing corruption within the Gardaí at the time. In this case, it's obviously 4 years on that we're hearing about it, presumably because of a journalist or someone else who was doing digging into it. And it's obviously quite a different story.
Imelda Munster, any of the rest of you?
Well, it is a very serious issue, Anya, and politicians should lead from the front. And we have the Road Safety Authority continuously mounting campaigns against the dangers of drink driving and the fact that you're breaking the law. But however, Minister Cowen has said that he's put his hands up in fairness to him and said that he was completely wrong. But I don't understand why he didn't convey this information onto his party leader at the time. And it gives a sense of a fundamental communication breakdown between Minister Cowen and his party leader, the Taoiseach, as he is now.
OK, Peter, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think Minister Cowen is very clear. He's accepted his personal responsibility. He's apologised. And obviously, which is key, is that the law was applied in full here without fear or favour. And also, I think we need to be very sympathetic in terms of the ramifications for road victims. And indeed, the last government and this government will continue to improve road safety legislation to ensure that we are more safer on our roads.
Jennifer, would you like to see the Minister make a Dáil statement, or is that the end of the matter?
No, I think that would be a really good idea. I think at this stage in 2020, it is really disappointing that we have senior politicians, that are still making mistakes, actually not even making mistakes, but it was illegal what happened. And I know it happened 4 years ago, but it's only coming to light now. And I'm just thinking of all the families whose lives have been devastated by drink driving. And I think it would actually be welcome for the Minister to make a statement to those families, acknowledge that what he did was wrong, and really take a lead now in this issue and make sure that we cut this out of our society once and for all.
So before we go to a break, Barry Cowen, will you be making a Dáil statement about this?
If that's what people would expect or would appreciate, I've no problem in doing that. I'm reiterating here as well my commitment to respond to the embarrassment, to the humiliation and to the shame associated with this event, and to move forward mindful of my responsibilities, mindful of the lessons that have been learned, And like I said, if it can be used in a way in which helps or assists somebody else not to take the same risk as I took on that occasion, that it will have been of some good.
All right. Thank you for that, and we'll be moving on now. We'll have more on the week in politics after this break.
For parents, for students, for teachers, there's a huge desire to have schools fully reopened in September. People do know that children's education and development is being damaged, as well as their emotional well-being. They need to be back in school, learning, socialising and processing the times that we've been through. But there has been a worrying attempt to pit students and parents against teachers, to turn parents against teachers' unions, who are seeking to ensure rightly that the reopening of schools is done safely. Because the real issue is the attempt to open schools or reopen schools on the cheap, putting children, teachers, their families and the wider community in danger. The Minister himself referenced the case of Denmark earlier. Schools opened 2 months ago with a strict 2-metre limit and class sizes of 10 students. They've taken over sports halls and other spaces to give the physical space to allow reopening to be safe. That's what we need to do here. That's what the science demands. That's the logic of it. We have to do that. That means getting the space, but it also means getting the staff. It doesn't mean jamming 30 or more students into cramped classrooms and piling more responsibilities onto overworked teachers and then calling them pods or bubbles or whatever and expecting that that's going to keep the virus away. This is our chance to bring down class sizes, to actually improve education and give children the extra support that they need. Take the thousands of substitute teachers, bring them in, employ them immediately. Employ more SNAs. We need to do it now in terms of the coronavirus, and we need to do it into the future in terms of improving our education.
In relation to the safe reopening of schools, obviously at the heart of any decision will be that the advice is clear, that the advice that we get from NPHET and the advice we've always been getting has been based on the safety of our citizens. So it'll be no different for schools. It'll have to be safe, and no minister is going to make a decision that would put students or teaching staff in jeopardy. That is not...
Welcome back. Well, there's been more than one own goal scored by the government this week. The row over ministerial appointments or non-appointments ruffled feathers in all three government parties, most of all Fianna Fáil. Joe McGraillig reports.
Forging a government agreement between three very different political parties was trying and at times rancorous. Then came the announcement of ministerial positions.
Yeah, I was disappointed. I had worked hard and I have an ambition to lead a department. So look, there's anger and there's frustration. Representation is important and geography is important.
I'm very disappointed with the party that they didn't see fit to put a senior minister into Connacht. We deserve to have a senior minister. You have to have somebody at the cabinet table. The people in Mayo almost gave me 15,000. There was election the first count. Leo Varadkar himself got 8,000 votes, and it took him 5 counts to get elected. And Pascal Donovan himself, between the two of them, got 12,000 votes, and I beat the two of them together. There's a new breed of Fine Gael TDs, and you know they come in fast, they go out fast because they don't look after their constituents.
Getting the balance right in cabinet appointments is tricky at any time, but with three parties' needs to be looked after, it was always going to be a challenge. Last Saturday, after ministers were named, it quickly became apparent much of the western part of the country lost out, despite the Chief Whip and Super Junior appointments coming from west of the Shannon.
I am baffled when you look at that map in the red area that you didn't see fit to have one senior minister from the top of Donegal to the bottom of Limerick. I am baffled that the west of Ireland and the northwest of Ireland will not have a senior minister in that area.
Two Sligo IT lecturers, Pádraig Hart and Pádraig McGroarty, undertook a breakdown of ministerial representation per registered voters around the country. their findings are stark.
In Dublin, you have one minister per every 152,000 voters. In Leinster as a whole, you have one minister for every 235,000 voters. In Munster, it's one minister per every 245,000 voters. But in Connacht Ulster, you have one minister per every 675,000 voters. One per 675,000 voters. That's where the disparity really exists, and that's where the problem is occurring.
On Thursday, the Taoiseach explained his approach to filling cabinet positions.
Former Taoiseach will tell you one of the toughest days they have is appointing a cabinet or indeed appointing ministers of state. And I understand that because it is extremely difficult for many individuals who were not selected. In our case, because we haven't been in power for 10 years, or in government for 10 years, there was a pent-up sort of anticipation and desire, understandable, for many people to become a minister. And unfortunately, we didn't have enough positions.
The Taoiseach also addressed the issue.
The truth is there are 40 constituencies. There are 26 counties in the state. It's not possible for every constituency or county to have a minister every time, let alone two.
One of the Dáil's new intake of TDs from the Roscommon Galway constituency does not accept those explanations.
The fact is, in many rural towns and villages, the recovery never came. And I mean, added to that now is obviously post-COVID-19. So we have an awful lot of work to do. I think the imbalance in relation to the senior cabinet ministers is a blow to the west of Ireland, and it's a blow to the southeast and another region which didn't get a senior cabinet voice around the table. And that's really disappointing. And, you know, I made the point to Leo Varadkar this week in the Dáil that while the cabinet won't be regionally balanced, investment, job creation and everything else needs to be regionally balanced.
With the appointment of the rest of the ministers of state, which itself led to high-profile and noteworthy rebuffs of job offers, areas that lost out on senior ministers have gained juniors, but their role and influence is completely different.
Junior ministers that they've appointed are coming into office with a serious expectation on their back. Are they going to be able to deliver that expectation? Well, constitutionally, they have no voice in cabinet. So that's going to be a major disadvantage to them before the start.
So let's turn to you, Peter Burke, because as we saw in Joe's report there, the dissent and the unhappiness wasn't only in Fianna Fáil. We saw Michael Ring being very upset there. Will this blow over, or will Western voters remember your party didn't put them at the top table?
Well, Hildegard knocked in as a minister at the top table, so we have put them at the top table, and indeed with a voice at the cabinet table, and that's key, because we're missing the point here if we think that, you know, the state appoints ministers just to look after their constituencies. That's not the case. I think the Taoiseach clearly pointed out there that not every constituency can have a minister every time, and indeed in my own constituency here in Longford Westmeath, it was back in the 80s the last time since we had a Fine Gael minister here in Minister Cooney. So I think we have to look at the bigger approach here. We have to see that ministers have to act in the best interest of the country, make decisions based on that. And as we've also seen in terms of our appointments, we have in Fine Gael 3 out of 7 women ministers. So we've done our best in terms of geography, in terms of gender balance, to bring a very diverse team to the table.
But there's a lot of women and there's a lot of people in Western and other areas very disappointed with the result. Imelda Munster, that point that government should, cabinets in particular, they should be about competence and not postcodes.
Well, precisely, Anya, but I think it's fair to say what we've seen over the last week has been unprecedented, particularly in relation to Fianna Fáil, the level of dissent. I mean, it's the equivalent of open warfare in Fianna Fáil. They're fighting like ferrets in a sack. And what are they fighting over? They're not fighting over how quickly we can solve our housing crisis, how quickly we can solve our crisis in our health service. They're not fighting for the rights of workers to retire at 65. They're fighting over the divvying up of the spoils of office. And within 1 week, we've seen exactly what Fianna Fáil priorities are, and that's dividing up the spoils of office take precedence over the many issues that are affecting the people in this country and the way that people voted for change. And that's top priority with them. And I think it's fair to say that Micheál Martin as Taoiseach has not only lost the support, the loyalty, but he's also lost the respect of his own party. And here we have him foisted on us as Taoiseach, and a Taoiseach who doesn't have the respect or the support of his own party. And he's now our Taoiseach for the
Well, he was elected by a majority of the Dáil and a coalition that represents the majority of the vote.
That's
but in terms
right, but
of that
he's now
point,
our Taoiseach, and he doesn't even command respect, loyalty or support from his own party members.
Barry Cowen on that. Sorry, Imelda, I just want to let Barry Cowen answer that you're not back a wet week and already the knives are out all over the place.
Well, in the first instance, Imelda is incorrect. The Taoiseach and the government, well, particularly Fianna Fáil, has the support of 76% of its members. That was the vote of 15,000 strong membership in recent weeks in relation to adhering to and going into government to implement the programme for government.
But this is more than just histrionics within a party. There is a serious argument here when it comes to, for instance, the stimulus package, that there won't be senior ministers from the West, from the South East, from the North East, from Limerick City to put their speak in for the divvy up.
Well, look, the announcement always generates interest. It's difficult enough to get a geographical spread at any given time. And what you have is 15 ministers for the nation, not for Leinster or Dublin or for the West or the North or the South. If I'm Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, it's not for the Midlands, it's not for Offaly, it's not for Laois Offaly, it's for the nation, it's for the country. And I'm at the cabinet table, as Peter said, as are others. And whether there's no vote taken at a cabinet table. So Hildegard Naughton, Dara Calleary and I have the same weight at that cabinet table to ensure and insist that government policy and the programme for government and what's contained within it has an impact on the whole of the nation, whole of the country, whether it's in relation to fisheries, whether it's in relation to rural development or whether it's in relation to public transport. That's the obligation we have. And, you know, to say that we're not interested in the major issues, we insisted on taking hold of the stewardship of housing and health, two of the predominant issues that dominated the last election, where people want to see a different emphasis, a different results, and we are focused and committed by our actions, and we will be judged on our actions, and hopefully we can live up to the expectation that many people have for the programme for government.
But Paul Murphy, as a Dublin TD, do you take the point that particularly this recession or this crisis, economic crisis that we face on account of COVID, that rural Ireland and young people will be hit the most? And you can argue that rural Ireland, certainly swathes of rural Ireland, are not represented in this government makeup.
Yeah, I think there's two issues that are intertwined here. The first is the nauseating spectacle of politicians who are on €95,000 a year as TDs, complaining and whinging about not getting an extra 40,000 or an extra 80,000 a year as a junior or senior ministry. And they're trying to pretend that there's something more about that than their own personal career advancement by saying they want to represent Mayo or Connacht or whatever, but I don't believe that they are interested in it. I think it's the usual mercs and perks for the establishment parties. The second issue is that sense of a lack of representation for ordinary people. In my opinion, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael create a culture of clientelism and a suggestion that if you have someone at the cabinet table, well, they'll be fighting for you. You look, even this week, Norma Foley, Minister for Education, first thing out of her mouth was that she'd be fighting for the people of Kerry. First announcement on Twitter was that she's launching a new school in Kerry. And so they create this perception. But I think it's a false perception. I mean, in Dublin South West, in my constituency, we've had ministers. We had a minister in the last government, we had a minister, and that did not make a difference for ordinary people on the ground in terms of housing, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare. And I think it's the same in Donegal and in Mayo. The question is, what type of politics? Do we have establishment politics or do we have left-wing politics to represent ordinary people, whether they be rural or urban?
Okay. And didn't that Norma Foley tweet from the new education minister talking about a development in her constituency? I know funds were approved for other schools as well, but it looked like a return to the bad old days.
It can be construed to be that. It can be construed to that, and it allows opponents take the pot shot that Paul has referred to. But, you know, we spent the last 4 or 5 months after the election working arduously to bring together three parties that could command a majority in the Dáil to ensure that they had the ability to implement the programme for government and what's contained within it. Other parties stood idly by. I know Paul and others seemingly spoke to Sinn Féin and had the prospect of a left-leaning alliance, but I didn't see anything emanating from that contains any symbol of a programme for government or how they might have implemented it or what impact it might have had on different parts of the country or different sectors within the economy.
Jennifer Whitmore, we've been talking about the argument that's been raging this past week about geography, the geographical representation of this new government. What's your assessment of these appointments in terms of gender, the representation of women, and also in terms of diversity? An argument about a unionist voice not being there and an argument about more diversity being needed, in particular in the Seanad appointments.
Yeah, I think what we've seen over the last few weeks is, people were selected, I believe, for ministerial positions based on their vote-getting ability within their constituencies, their loyalty to their leaders. It wasn't based necessarily on ability or their ability to get things done for the country and not just for constituents. And I think that is a big flaw in our system at the moment. We have limited resources. We need to make sure that those resources are actually used to the best of its ability for the whole country. When it comes to gender, I think the government really lost and missed out an opportunity to actually make it a more gender balanced cabinet. Only 4 of the senior ministers, 4 of 15 were women, and it's 5 of 20 of the juniors are women. And I think that was a real missed opportunity to actually bring a level of gender balance into our decision-making processes. In instances where the government can do it, they should use those opportunities. And again, I think, a balance across our governance system it benefits everyone in our society. So it's something that the government should be focusing on.
And Peter Burke, when we look at Leo Varadkar's keeping his military aide de camp, isn't he? And Simon Coveney is looking to keep his Garda Car. And we don't know whether that's going to happen yet. And we have fully 20 junior ministers being appointed. It's back to the good old days of Bertie Ahern, isn't it?
Absolutely not. Anything like a Garda driver or a car will depend on advice from the Gardaí and the Defence Forces. And also that this is a partnership government. There will be significant responsibilities still in the hands of the Taoiseach and work that he will have to do. So this is by no means reflective of any past era. It's reflective of a government that is commands the popular vote in terms of over 50% and also has a programme for government that commands a majority of over 30 on the election of Taoiseach in the Dáil, and it has the capacity to be a very good government in terms of implementing a very ambitious programme for government.
Imelda Munster, there's your answer.
Well, no, I don't believe that. It's not what the people voted for, Anya. The people voted for change. The last thing the people wanted to see was Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in government together. We've had the last 4 years of the Tweedledum, Tweedledee type politics of one propping up the other. And it's just not what people voted for. It's the exact opposite, in fact. And there's no signs from the programme for government, which is so loosely worded, not costed, or anything definitive in it that would lead you to have any confidence in the fact that this is indeed a government for change. It's not.
I want to put one criticism that's been made by Jim O'Callaghan to you, Barry Cowen. Jim O'Callaghan, of course, refusing a junior ministerial appointment under Helen McEntee in Justice. But he's saying a mistake was made in letting Fine Gael have the senior ministries in Foreign Affairs and in Justice, because what that means is that Fine Gael is going to be essentially the main voice in the Brexit talks, and that was a strategic mistake by your party. That's a fair point, isn't it?
Those will be given responsibility in relation to Brexit, and there's very serious negotiations taking place presently that will have grave implications for my own area of responsibility if they weren't to proceed according to our wishes. Is the government will speak as one. We've 3 parties coming together here with having made their own priorities, made their own compromises, have agreed on issues and a way in which those issues should be addressed. And there's no question but that the likes of Dara Calleary in his role is one which blends those 3 together, is one which prioritises legislation to give effect to the ambition that's contained within the programme for government. And in relation to Brexit, this country has been united, thankfully, in relation to Brexit over recent years. And if it was us thinking of the country's interests rather than our own, that was the case, much to our disadvantage in relation to our electoral success, I might add. But that's the consequences of doing the right thing at the right time. And that's what we did, and that's what we continue to do. And this government will work collaboratively, collectively, and will ensure that our interests are best served by those who are given the privilege to do so on behalf of those that elected us. And I respect Imelda's point in relation to her being of the belief that this does not reflect the people's wishes. The people's wishes were expressed. It was up to the Dáil to reflect those wishes and come together and form an alliance or form a government that could have a majority. Fianna Fáil in years past got over 40% of the vote, and we accepted the will of the Dáil, which is the will of the Constitution, and that's what people fought for, and that's what we abide by, and we respect it and appreciate it.
Imelda Munster, it wasn't just the government parties, of course, who had their difficulties this week. Sinn Féin attracting a lot of criticism and apologies at the latter end of the week from Michelle O'Neill and Mary Lou MacDonald over the breaching of social distancing at Bobby Story's funeral in Belfast. A lot of damage has been done to relations in the executive, and unionists are warning now this is going to make crowd control for the 12th much more difficult. What can your party do to remedy that mistake?
Well, firstly, I mean, both Michelle O'Neill and Mary Lou MacDonald made it very clear that they had adhered to public health guidelines and social distancing, and, you know, they were invited by the family of Bobby Story to be a part of the funeral cortege, and that was within public health guidelines too. There were just 30 people there. But you can't stop people coming out onto the street, coming out of the gates of their house and standing at the pavement. We've seen that with several other funerals. And there was
but you
nothing
can obviously avoid selfies, and apologies were made. What I'm asking is, what does your party do now? Because damage has been done to what had been, you know, really progressive relationships developing in that executive and at Stormont. What can your party do to fix that now?
Well, I mean, obviously, Michelle O'Neill has issued statements and has said that she had apologised for the hurt caused, you know. But I think in general, Anya, most people know, and as I said, we've seen it with several other funerals, people want to come out and pay respects to the deceased. They want to show the love and support to the family, and that's what they did. And we had party stewards there that were trying their best. We also put the funeral online, and over 250,000 people watched the funeral online. But certainly, I mean, Michelle O'Neill has been to the fore in leadership right through this crisis. Right. Even when people across the water were talking about herd immunity, Michelle O'Neill led from the front, and she'll continue to lead from the front.
All right, and we're going to be talking more about social distancing and reopening the economy when we come back after the break.
Today, the new Taoiseach and the ministers will celebrate their elevation to high office. Tomorrow, and in the weeks and months ahead, your government will become known for eco-austerity, for a two-tier healthcare system, and for a worsening housing crisis. A government which represents the rich, the landlords, and big business. It will be a hated government. Remember what dominated during the election: healthcare, housing, and the pension age. Between the election and now, a pandemic showed us the weakness of our public health system and the possibility of incorporating the private system. But instead of a commitment to build a one-tier quality national health service, the programme contains a positive reference to maintaining private healthcare, a continuation of two-tier healthcare, with better healthcare for the better off and worse for the rest. On housing, your programme continues the reliance on the private sector. It's a continuation of Rebuilding Ireland. It contains commitments for less building of public housing than was in the Green Manifesto, than was in the Fianna Fáil Manifesto, and even was in the Fine Gael Manifesto. In the words of one of those who negotiated the programme, it will make the homeless crisis worse. On the pension age, you're kicking the increase to 67 down the road, but it's clear that you won't reduce it to 65, and Fine Gael will continue to push for it to go up to 67 and then 68. Rise and the socialist left will not just be making speeches of opposition in the Dáil. We'll be building movements of opposition in the streets, in the communities and in workplaces. to defeat this government's plans for a massively hiked carbon tax, to demand the building of public housing and the construction of an Irish NHS. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael entering government together is not a sign of strength, it's a sign of extreme weakness. It's a last-ditch attempt by the political establishment to hang on to power. In 2007, before the last crisis, the combined vote of FF and FG was almost 70%. Now, as this crisis opens, it's at less than 45%. There's an enormous space in Irish politics for the building of a mass socialist movement. We'll be fighting for a left government to implement a socialist Green New Deal, one based on public...
Welcome back. So will tomorrow's meeting of the new Cabinet clarify when we can travel abroad for holidays? Is a decision coming tomorrow? Will it take another 2 weeks? Or is the reality that staycations are here for most of us for 2020? It's the first of many tough calls ahead as we reopen. Here's Maggie Doyle's report.
One of the biggest challenges facing the new government is what to do about travel into and out of the country. Last week saw the resumption of 40% of Ryanair's flights, with other airlines flying to holiday destinations. The Dublin Airport Authority says the estimated passengers flying in and out on the first 2 days of July was almost 20,000. Of that number, 63% were people departing. That's more than 90% lower than the same time last year, but scientists and health professionals are concerned.
We would like people not to travel. I think it makes much more sense to not go ahead with that booking than to risk travelling abroad, picking up this infection.
The current government advice is for anybody who arrives in Ireland to self-isolate for 2 weeks.
We have no effective way of monitoring this or ensuring that this happens. And that's really important because a lot of these people are going to be coming back from countries or visiting from countries where the levels of COVID-19 are higher than they are in Ireland.
Professor Ryan believes that there is an opportunity now for the new government to plan for a potential second wave of the virus so that normal life can resume.
I think that we should be using the summer months while things are under control for the time being to allow the government to create a sustainable framework for the containment and suppression of COVID-19 in Ireland. And if we have a second surge, which would be catalysed by the rapid seeding of new SARS-CoV-2 from foreign travel, then we are really jeopardising the possibility of schools looking in any way normal in September.
The Minister for Health, Stephen Donnelly, will bring a recommendation on international travel to Cabinet tomorrow amid calls from opposition for a decision to be made on the options they say government has.
They can clearly weigh in foursquare behind the Chief Medical Officer and that would provide clarity. It might be frustrating for people intending to travel, but it would be clarity and it would also provide them with protections. The alternative is that they agree that some degree of opening up in whatever shape or form would come, whether it be in terms of air bridges or safe travel zones. And with that would come a requirement, in my opinion, that for a suite of measures and checks and controls at our ports and airports, which we don't have at the minute.
In the meantime, airlines are back up and running, albeit with fewer passengers.
Maggie Doyle reporting. And Imelda Munster, there is huge economic pressure to reopen the economy. There's huge pressure for people to be able to take holidays that they have paid for. But should they? Is the government right to postpone a decision on this until July the 19th?
Well, I suppose only the public health expertise should be at the forefront of any government making that decision first and foremost. We can't afford to get this wrong, and although the tourism industry is one of the hardest hit and one of the first to be hit, I mean, if you take on board that we had 10 million visitors to Ireland last year, that's pretty much gone, as of this year. But the current checks and restrictions at our airports are wholly inadequate as it stands. You have the system where you're compelled to fill in a form and then it's followed up with a phone call. But we've heard that, less than 50% of people are taking that call.
So what do you want to see happen?
Well, we had previously called for temperature screening at our ports and our airports, and we should also look at introducing rapid testing on site, as other countries have introduced, and that would do away with, if you're tested on site, you don't get to board a flight, or if you're tested coming into the country and you test positive, you're put straight into isolation, because we just simply can't afford to get this wrong. Everything depends on how we manage this.
Barry Cowen, Billy Kelleher, of course, who broke the social distancing rules himself, didn't he, when he turned up at the National Convention Centre last weekend. He says it was OK because he'd had a test, apparently, leaving Brussels. But it was a breach of the rules. This is part of what people want from government, clarity. They also want, by the way, leaders following those rules.
Yeah, well, it's Stephen Donnelly will bring forward tomorrow his proposals.
To kick the can down the road for 2 weeks?
Based on the expert advice that he has from public health officials, based on the sectoral advice that he has garnered, and ultimately the Cabinet will have a discussion and have a debate and decide what is the right move to make. But I mean, it's a very fluid situation. And I know people would like to see clarity, would like to know within a month, would like to know within 2 months. It's no different than the education system and the schools being brought back and people expecting and parents hoping that they could get clarity. But unfortunately, the situation is so fluid that there's changes evolving as the anticipated dissipation of the disease has not materialised. But yet there is ways and means by which we can update our adjudication of our checking of our systems.
Well, what about the
protocols.
temperature checks and screening at the airports
they would
Amanda Munster was
they would
talking
seem
about?
to be reasonable proposals and expectations, and it's something that can be brought to the likes of a Cabinet meeting tomorrow to find out what progress, if any, has been made in that area and how that can be explored and how that can help and assist with the industry in order to be in a position to take advantage of any upturn that they might be able to do so, because it's imperative that we help and assist that sector as best we can to re-energise the economy and help and assist our economy get back to growth.
Peter Burke, one thing that could be clarified is the question of compensation for people who can't take the holidays they have paid for because the government is telling them not to travel.
Yeah, well, I think it's very clear that public health advice has to come first. And we saw over the last week that 13% of cases were directly related to foreign travel. So we can only reopen our country in a managed basis when it is safe to do so. Public health advice has to underwrite everything in this regard. And that's why it's important that political leaders lead by example. And as you mentioned in your programme earlier on, the attitude of Sinn Féin in this regard was absolutely outrageous in terms of breaching social distancing and taking selfies. And when we talk about the word change in Irish politics, one thing is very clear is that the hold that IRA veterans has over Sinn Féin really shows that party hasn't changed at all. We need to be very
Peter
careful.
Burke, but equally, Peter Burke, the question I asked you, which I think a lot of people watching want the answer to, is whether the government should be considering compensating people who paid a lot of hard-earned money for a holiday, and now the government is saying, even though the planes are flying, we don't want you to get on it on account of COVID. Should the government give them their money back?
But this is a fast-moving situation, Anya. I can't give an absolute answer to that at the moment because it's fast-moving. Okay. Things are changing. And we saw last week with the 13% increase in cases for overseas travel. That is something the government has to look at so closely and manage this process, which it has done very well over the last number of months.
Paul Murphy, I suppose when you look at the sacrifice we've seen from all our frontline workers, from the Chief Medical Officer in particular, is giving up a holiday such a big thing? Should people simply give up on the idea of compensation?
Well, I think first thing is we need to follow the public health advice, and that's what needs to dictate our public policy, not the interests of private companies, private operations like Ryanair, who've obviously been out pushing for this. I think, look, everybody has made significant sacrifices because of the coronavirus, some much more so than others, because of being frontline workers, because of losing loved ones, etc. I think if we had clarity from the government that people should not travel except for essential purposes, and I think that's the advice that we need, that's what's in line with the health advice, well then what will flow from that is that people will have an entitlement to refunds from companies. And we should remember that the former Minister for Travel, Shane Ross, made representations to the European Commission effectively on behalf of the airline industry looking to suspend the right of people to access refunds. And that thankfully wasn't accepted, but the likes of Ryanair, who are trying to dictate public health policy, having flown people over and back to Cheltenham only a few months ago, they're still dragging their heels on providing people with the refunds that people are legally entitled to. The other people who must not pay the price for this is the airline workers. I mean, Aer Lingus is talking about 70% cuts to pay. Ryanair is talking about 10 to 20%. There's similar attacks happening within the DAA. Ordinary workers on the front line must not pay for this either.
Just before I go to Jennifer Whitmore on education, Barry Cowen, maybe you can answer the question on compensation for people's holidays that Peter Burke couldn't. Will they be getting their money back? Will the government give the kind of clarity Paul Murphy was talking about so people can claim their money back?
Any applications that predate the government advice, there is an avenue open to people. But the avenues can't remain open if the government advice is only to travel where necessary. And that should be adhered to, and people think people should respect that and appreciate that, and I think they do and they will. And we're encouraging people whom had sought to travel abroad primarily to look at holidaying in Ireland and help and assist our industry and our tourism sector to help and assist them in their efforts to regain many of the jobs that have been lost and many of those seasonal ones that have yet to be got back.
Look, holidays are one thing, but Jennifer Whitmore, the one issue that, again, the Minister Cowen was saying it's not possible because COVID is such a fluid situation to give total clarity yet. But the one issue that parents don't have a lot of clarity on yet is whether their children will be returning to school in September. It appears they won't be going back full-time following the latest guidelines. It also clear the teachers' unions are very unhappy about aspects of the safety regime that may be facing them. There's lots of questions, but I want to ask you this, Jennifer Whitmore. Did we miss a trick by not saying that education is an essential service? Is education, if transport's essential, if, cleaners in hospitals are essential, is education for our children not essential?
Yeah, I think, Anya, I've spoken to many parents and teachers and principals and actually children over the last few weeks, and they are really worried about what's going to happen when September comes, and they're coming at it from different perspectives. Really, when COVID hit, what it did was it showed all the vulnerabilities in our system and where we haven't been investing in our public services. So our schools haven't been invested in properly over the years, and that's why we have some of the highest pupil to teacher ratios in the EU, and that's really now hitting hard. So what we need is to make sure that if the schools are opened up, and hopefully they will be opened up, but that everyone is kept safe within that environment, and that is going to require an investment from government. We're investing in our businesses, we need to invest in our schools. We need to make sure that there's sufficient teachers, that there's sufficient SNAs, that there's sufficient cleaners, and things like, dispensers for the schools. Some of our schools don't even have hot running water, which is crazy in this day and age.
And you've been hearing all about this in the COVID committee. So what do you need to see from government, from your point of view, that will give parents and school principals and teachers the clarity about the way it will go to work? What is needed in terms of money? What is needed in terms of cleaning packages? What is needed in terms of technology support, space, teacher numbers? What do you think is needed?
Well, I mean, all the things that you've listed there, the schools need to know that they're going to have enough teachers, that there's going to be enough substitute teachers if teachers get ill, that there's enough PPE, that there's enough desks, is the spacing between desks or between children, that children can keep their hands clean, that there's running water there for them. I mean, all that has to be provided, but they need to be giving them that information now, because these schools and parents have to plan. And the reality is, if we don't get things like the schools and the creches up and running properly, we will not get our economy up and running properly. Parents will not be able to get back to work, and particularly women won't be able to get back to work. And, we do run the risk of having a two-tiered re-entry into the workforce, where women may actually have to stay at home and be there for their children, because those fundamental cogs in our society, such as schools and childcare, are not there for them.
And Barry Cowen, your party in opposition was very critical of Fine Gael for the way that they handled the Leaving Cert. But, we're not getting any greater certainty. You were just saying, it's very fluid and it'll merge over the summer.
It is very fluid.
There's only 8 weeks before they're supposed to be back in school.
It is very fluid, and there are, changes and amendments that may well happen before the schools get back insofar as they can. But there is a commitment on the part of the government to move on this, to move swiftly on this, and to allow schools ascertain and audit their facilities in line with the recommendations as they presently are.
Is a row of the teachers' unions looming on this one?
I sincerely hope not, and I wouldn't expect so. It's about, there's huge solidarity has been shown in this country across a wide range of sectors in order to respond to COVID, and everybody has bought into it and played an essential part in ensuring that thankfully the deaths have been kept down, and thankfully essential workers have been able to do their job. And as Jennifer says, it could well be that we moved into that space in relation to the education sector and education facility. It's imperative that children get back to school, get back in amongst their friends and get into an atmosphere that is conducive to learning, irrespective of the huge advances that have been made in technology that has allowed them in the meantime to keep their schooling moving in the right direction. But it's imperative and essential, and I think there is a commitment on the part of the government to work with the teachers' union to find a solution. As I said, being a fluid situation, there could be positive moves yet to be entertained, and I would hope that would be the case.
And Paul Murphy, do you think the teachers' unions are right in the line that they are taking, that they will go back to the schools in line with the health advice that applies elsewhere in the country? But whereas the guidelines this week we're talking about as far as practicable and so on.
See, I don't think that this is a teachers versus parents or teachers versus students issue. I think everybody who works in a school or attends a school, and let's be clear, there's 1 million primary and post-primary students in this country and 4,000 schools. Every one of those people, and the teachers and the SNAs and the other staff, they all need to be safe when they're in work, and the wider community needs those places to be safe, because otherwise we'll be talking about new hotspots in schools instead of in nursing homes or in meat factories. We'll be talking about schools being a problem. And right now, the teachers who know the situation better than anyone else and have been working extremely hard over the last months in difficult circumstances in terms of remote learning and everything else, and they're saying very clearly, and at the COVID committee during the week, they said very clearly that that the resources have not been provided so far for the schools to be able to open safely. And that's a big problem. It's a big problem for all students. I'd say it's a particularly big problem for students with special needs. And we absolutely need to do everything that needs to be done so those people can go back to school, but that hasn't been done so far.
Final word to you on this, Imelda Munster.
I suppose we all accept that the objective has to be a full and safe return to school. And I think, in fairness, parents don't expect absolute certainty, with still 7 weeks out from the return to school. But they do deserve clarity, and that clarity hasn't been forthcoming. The Department of Education have been on the back foot. I mean, we've had lockdown since March, and it was only in mid-May that they started initial discussions about planning for the return to school. But we need confirmation also that, additional costs incurred by schools, whether it be hygiene, cleaning, additional PPE equipment, will be covered by the department, and that hasn't been clarified. And I would say something to
just
the
briefly,
new Minister,
please, Amanda, we're running out of time.
The new Minister for Education, Norma Foley, needs to clear the decks. She needs to make this her number one priority, and she needs to issue a roadmap as a matter of priority and publish it. We have a roadmap for the economy, rightly so. We need a roadmap for schools.
Thank you for that. And as politics is returning to normal, our political diary is back. Here's Fergal O'Brien's look at the coming days.
Tomorrow, a meeting of the full Cabinet is due to take decisions on the opening up of international travel. This follows a meeting of the Cabinet Subcommittee on COVID-19 held on Friday, when ministers were briefed by senior officials and Acting Chief Medical Officer Ronan Glynn. Leaders' Questions in the Dáil Chamber returns on Tuesday for the first time since before the general election. Instead of asking the questions, Micheál Martin as the new Taoiseach will have to answer them. Firstly from Sinn Féin's Mary Lou MacDonald, leader of the largest opposition party. Also in the Dáil this week, the Micro-Enterprise Loan Funds Bill will be taken through all stages. The bill provides for low-cost COVID-19 loans to small businesses. A number of motions to provide for additional funding estimates for government departments will also be taken. The newly constituted Seanad sits on Tuesday and Thursday and is due to take all stages of the micro-enterprise bill once it passes the lower house. And the Special Committee on COVID-19 response meets on Tuesday morning. It will hear from the Governor of the Central Bank, Gabriel Makhlouf, and also from representatives of primary and secondary school principals on reopening schools in September.
And that's our lot on the Week in Politics this Sunday. Thank you to all the guests who joined us. Thanks to you at home for watching. And until next week, at the same times, from all of us to all of you, goodbye.